Eli and I had been together for 10 years, married for 2. A month ago, we took the plunge and bought our first house together, a quaint little place in the small inland town of Was, Georgia. I won't give too many details, partly to keep it private, but also because after what happened, I'm not sure how much of this I even want to remember. The house is on a quiet street with a sprawling yard that backs up to a dense patch of woods. At first, we were drawn to the place because of the space, perfect for the dog we were planning to adopt. Eventually for the kids we hope to raise here. We worked similar shifts with me getting home around 5 and Sarah usually home by 6. The first couple of nights went without incident. We spent the weekend unpacking and getting used to the house, but it was that Monday night when everything changed. We had only been in bed for about 20 minutes. The lights just turned off when it happened. From outside we heard it, the unmistakable sound of music, blaring old-time music. The first thing we noticed was the quality of the music. It wasn't modern or poppy, it was vintage old and crackling, like something straight out of the 1940s. The music came from somewhere outside in our backyard, but we didn't have neighbors close enough for this to make sense. Sarah and I exchanged a look, half confusion, half fear, and I pulled the covers back and got up. The windows were shut, but I walked over to mine and cracked it open. The song was clearer now. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? By Henry Hall. Strange choice. It should have been cheerful, but hearing it through the night with the darkness of the woods just beyond the yard, it felt off. I could see Sarah staring at me, eyes wide. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice tight with unease. I ran downstairs to check the backyard light, flicked the switch, and saw the soft glow illuminate the grass. I stepped outside, straining to listen, but the music was louder now, almost too loud to ignore. I walked to the edge of the backyard and looked around, searching for the source. Didn't take long to realize the sound wasn't coming from the yard at all. It was coming from the woods. The song finished with an eerie note, and the silence that followed made my skin crawl. I went back inside, still holding onto that creeping feeling. "It must be some kind of prank," I said, trying to reassure myself more than Sarah. "Probably some kids messing around. New people in town, you know, they think it's funny." But even as I said it, I realized how strange it sounded. Why would anyone do that? And why that song? The next night, just after we turned out the lights again, the music started. "Tiptoe Through the Tulips." Louder this time. It blasted through the night air, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sarah's expression mirrored mine. Genuine disgust, but also genuine fear. We both knew this was more than just some prank. I walked to the window again, this time opening it a little wider. Out on the grass, something moved in the yard. I could see a shape low to the ground. Not a person. My gut twisted. "I'm going out there," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Sarah quickly protested, "No, Eli, let's just call the cops. This isn't right." "I will," I assured her, "but I need to at least check. I'm not going to let some punk scare us." I grabbed my flashlight, headed for the door, and stepped into the yard. The moment I stepped outside, the music was deafening. I walked toward the sound, but when I saw the object lying on the ground, I froze. An old, battered radio, like something your grandmother would have kept in her attic, was sitting in the middle of the yard, the source of the strange music. I picked it up, hit the off switch, and looked up at the window. "There, someone left this here," I called out to Sarah, holding up the radio. "Trying to mess with us." Then came the scream. "Eli, run!" I turned around, my heart leaping into my throat. There, standing just beyond the edge of the yard, were 3 figures. 3 tall, motionless shapes standing in the woods, spaced out like they were waiting for something. Or someone. I couldn't move. It was like the air had thickened, frozen around me. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching. Then a deep primal fear hit me, and I did the only thing I could. I ran, fast. Slamming the door behind me, I locked it with shaking hands. Sarah was already upstairs, hysterical, her face pale and wet with tears. She grabbed my arm as soon as I reached her, clutching me like I was her lifeline. "They were watching you. They were waiting," she whispered, her voice full of panic. "We need to call the cops now." I did just that. I dialed 911 and told them everything. The operator was calm, but it didn't help my nerves. I could hear Sarah's soft sobs as we waited for help. The police arrived a short while later. Officers Davis and Reed checked the backyard, their flashlights cutting through the night. They took the radio into evidence, though I only touched the top. They assured me it was standard procedure. They didn't seem as rattled as we were, but their thoroughness gave me some comfort. They did a quick search of the woods, their flashlights sweeping through the trees, but the figures were gone. "We'll keep an eye on the area," Officer Reed said, though I could tell it didn't really calm either of us. "But you should stay alert. If they come back, don't hesitate to call us." After they left, we locked all the doors and huddled in the living room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make us feel safer, for the moment. The following weeks have been uneventful, but I can't help but feel like we're being watched. Every time I hear a strange noise at night or see a shadow move in the corner of my eye, I freeze. We've both agreed that if anything happens again, we'll be ready, and we'll record it, because I'll be damned if I'm not getting evidence if those figures return. I've been a nurse for several years working in different hospitals and facilities, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened during my last shift at a geriatric hospital in a quiet town about 30 minutes from home. I'd worked with elderly patients before, so I was familiar with the challenges, but this night would be different. I was working the graveyard shift running on almost no sleep. My mind a little foggy from exhaustion. I had been assigned to the Alzheimer's ward, a place where the patients often drift in and out of lucid moments. Most of them were sweet, and I had gotten to know their routines quickly. But there was one patient who kept me on edge that night, Lena. Lena was in her late 70s, and though she was mostly docile, she would have these moments of agitation. She kept telling me about voices she was hearing, and a man dressed in black who kept standing in the corner of her room. It sounded like something from a horror story, but I knew better than to dismiss her. For someone with Alzheimer's, the line between reality and their imagination could blur. It was my job to make them feel safe, even when it seemed like their fears were nothing more than delusions. There was another patient in Lena's room, a sweet lady named Mildred. She had requested that I close the curtain before my shift began so Lena would leave her alone. Mildred smiled whenever I came by, but her memory wasn't what it used to be. I'd be dealing with Lena that night, and she wasn't having it. Every time I went into her room, she'd speak about the man in black and the voices. Her hands would tremble as she clutched the sheets, her eyes wide with terror. It was around 11 p.m. when most of the patients were asleep. But not Lena. She was still talking about the voices. Each time I went in, I tried to calm her. I didn't want to turn on the TV to distract her out of courtesy to the other patient. So I sat with Lena, held her hand, and gently reassured her. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're not alone, Lena. I'm right here. I'll always be just a call away." She seemed to settle for a bit after that, drifting into a light sleep. But as I moved through the ward checking on the other patients, the atmosphere felt off. It was a quiet, eerie kind of night. Around midnight, I was in the linen room restocking my cart. The hospital was dead silent. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning broke the stillness. But then I heard it. A noise faint at first, but unmistakable. Something moved. I turned, expecting to see one of my coworkers, but there was no one there. The room was still. I chalked it up to my tired brain playing tricks on me and kept stalking the cart. But then I felt it, something cold and heavy pressed down on my shoulder. I spun around in a panic, but there was no one there. No one in the room, no one nearby. I looked over my shoulder again, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I quickly stepped out into the hall, heart pounding, but everything was silent. Still. I went back to stalking, trying to shake the feeling off. But as I turned to face the door, I froze. A man, dressed in black, standing outside the glass window of the linen room door. I couldn't move. My heart stopped as I stared at him. He was grinning, his smile wide and unsettling. I screamed, my voice echoing through the hall. The figure vanished, disappearing from view through the glass. I collapsed to the floor, trembling in disbelief. I could barely breathe, but I forced myself to get up. My mind raced. Had I just imagined that? But no, I had seen him. I wasn't hallucinating. My screams woke up the entire ward. Nurse Carla came running in. When I managed to stand, I asked her, still breathless, "Did you see him? The man in black? He was standing right there smiling at me." Carla blinked at me in confusion. "What man? There's no one out here, Emma." I was shaking as I walked her over to the linen room door. She checked the entire ward, every room, every hallway. No one, nothing, no man in black. By the time I returned to Lena's room, I was still shaken. My pulse was racing. And when I walked in, Lena, whose terror had seemed to subside, was sitting up in bed, her wide eyes staring straight at me. "There's a man," she whispered hoarsely. "He's here. The man in black." I froze. "What does he look like, Lena?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "Was he smiling?" Lena's face shifted, her brows furrowed. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed focused. her gaze clear and intent. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice full of confusion. I felt my heart skip a beat. She was asking me how I knew about the man, and my stomach dropped. How could she possibly know? And then Lena started screaming, "Get me out of here! He's coming! He's coming!" I rushed to her side, but her cries grew louder, more frantic. The other nurses arrived to help calm her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was as if Lena knew something I didn't, or worse, that she'd been telling the truth all along. The rest of the shift was a blur. I couldn't shake the image of the man in black standing there in the hallway. His twisted smile still burned into my mind. When I was finally relieved, I didn't even finish my shift. I was too rattled. The next morning, I texted the head nurse and told her that I would not be returning. I couldn't work in that place again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something unexplainable. I'd never been diagnosed with any kind of hallucination, and I knew that sleep deprivation could mess with your head, but this? It felt different. The sensation of the hand on my shoulder, the sight of the man smiling through the glass, it all felt too real to dismiss. I can't explain what happened that night. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was something more, but one thing's for sure, I've never been the same since. It was a typical night, or at least I thought it would be. I had just finished my shift at the mechanic shop, clocking out at midnight, and decided to take my usual route home. The town I live in is about as quiet as they come, small, isolated, surrounded by thick woods and vast stretches of farmland. There's not much to do here other than work, sleep, and drive aimlessly down roads that seem to go on forever. By the time I reached the familiar stretch of road just a few miles from my house, it was around 12:15 a.m. I was cruising at about 50 miles per hour, the night air warm and calm. It was midsummer, around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and I had the top down on my convertible, enjoying the peace of it all. The road I was on ran between a cornfield on one side and a dense patch of woods on the other. I had driven this road 1,000 times before, and I never expected anything to happen, until it did. I heard a scream. A woman's scream, loud, blood-curdling, and full of terror. I slammed my foot on the brakes, my heart instantly leaping into my throat. I didn't know where it had come from, left or right. I couldn't tell. It echoed in the still air, sending a cold rush through me. I quickly pulled over to the side of the road and killed the engine. I was wide awake now, every sense on high alert. The scream came again, this time louder and more frantic, coming from the left side of the road towards the woods. Without thinking, I grabbed the baton from the back seat of my car. I didn't know what I was planning to do, but I couldn't leave a woman out here in distress. I had to help. I stepped out of the car and yelled into the night. "Who's out there?" A voice called back immediately, desperate. "Please help me!" My blood ran cold. The voice was so clear, so real. There was no hesitation, no confusion. I knew I had to get to her. I ran toward the woods, swiping twigs and bushes out of my way as I pushed deeper into the trees. "Keep screaming!" I yelled, trying to guide her towards me. Her cry rang out again, echoing through the woods. "Help! Please help!" I ran faster, following her voice, but something felt off. As I got further into the woods, I realized the screams weren't getting any closer. No matter how far I ran, no matter how loudly I called back, the woman's cries stayed the same distance, as if she was always just out of reach. This wasn't right. I stopped in my tracks. "Tell me where you are!" I shouted. There was a brief silence. Then, as if on cue, the woman screamed again. "Help, please!" But this time the scream sounded exactly the same as before, like she was in the same spot. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The air seemed to thicken around me, the woods closing in as if something was watching. I started to feel the weight of it, the strange oppressive stillness of the forest. Something clicked. This wasn't a rescue, this was a trap. I turned around, my mind racing, and started running back in the direction I came from. I sprinted through the woods, not looking back. Every step felt like a race against something I couldn't see. When I finally burst out of the trees, I saw my car up ahead, the headlights still on, casting long shadows on the road. The moment I made it back to the car, I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking. But as I sat there catching my breath, I realized something terrifying. The woman's screams, she hadn't stopped. They were still coming, still echoing from deep in the woods, even though I was already in the safety of my car. And they hadn't gotten any closer. It was like she was following me, like the distance between us never changed. I could barely think straight. I had to get out of there. I turned the ignition and drove off, my hands tight on the wheel, my heart still racing. I called 911 as I drove, explaining what had happened, unsure if I was overreacting or if something much darker was at play. I didn't stick around to wait for the authorities. My head was spinning, my body trembling. I just needed to get home, put it all behind me. I didn't tell anyone about the incident right away, just a few close friends and family members. They told me I was probably just tired, that it was probably a prank or my mind playing tricks. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made my stomach churn. The body of a woman somewhere in her 30s had been found deep in the woods not far from the very area where I'd heard the screams. A hiker had discovered it while walking his dog. The details were sparse, but there was one thing that stood out. There were no signs of foul play, no injuries, no signs of struggle, and the location of the body, exactly where I had heard the woman's cries. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow crossed paths with the woman before she died. The woods were vast, yes, but the timing, the location, it felt too close to be a coincidence. I couldn't stop thinking about her voice, the woman I'd heard. Was it her spirit reaching out for help, or was it something else, something darker? I didn't know. All I knew was that I'd never take that road again. Not at night, not alone, and I'll never forget the sound of that scream echoing in the woods. I had an interview lined up in Arizona and figured I'd turn it into a short trip. Since it was a 3-hour drive from home, I decided to book an Airbnb rather than a hotel. After searching for options, I landed on a little house that seemed perfect. Secluded, quiet, and half the price of any hotels in the area. It was a bit farther from the interview site, about 30 minutes, but that didn't bother me. I was more interested in the privacy and the stunning desert view from the backyard. I arrived late in the afternoon just as the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of purple and orange. The place was small but charming, nestled at the end of a dead-end road with nothing but open desert for miles. I set up my laptop in the living room to catch up on some work and settled in for the evening. The night before my interview, I was practicing questions, reviewing the company's history, and trying to calm my nerves. It was around 9 p.m. when it happened. A sharp, distinct tap at the window. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. I froze, instinctively turning my head to look, but outside was nothing but darkness. No one was there. It was a little unsettling, but I told myself it was probably a bug or maybe the wind. The desert had some huge insects. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, my interview went well. I spent the rest of my time exploring the local area, grabbing a bite at a few restaurants, and enjoying the quiet solitude of the desert. Little did I know, while I was lounging in the backyard, someone was likely watching me. That night, as I was relaxing inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix to unwind, it happened again. Tap a single deliberate knock on the window. This time, I was much more rattled. I jumped up and rushed to the window. Nothing. But I could still feel my pulse racing. I checked all the other windows, then opened the front door and peered outside. The stillness of the desert night stretched before me, nothing out of the ordinary. I stepped onto the back porch, the air crisp and cold. The desert stretched out before me, dark and silent. That's when I heard it. A strange, unsettling sound, someone clicking their tongue in the distance beyond the reach of the porch light. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The clicking came again, closer this time. I looked around, scanning the dark landscape for any sign of movement. Then I saw it. A shadow barely noticeable against the desert night shifted near some scrub brush. A person dressed in dark clothes was standing just outside the reach of the light. I felt my stomach twist with unease. I called out, my voice shaky. "Hey, you're on private property. If you don't leave, I'll call the cops." The figure didn't respond immediately, but then, almost as if in acknowledgement, they started walking away. Their movement was unnervingly quick, like they were trying to avoid being seen. I wondered, was it the host? The house was remote, and the only person I'd interacted with was Marcella, the Airbnb owner. But the thought of her lurking in the dark was almost too strange to consider. That night, as I lay in bed trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I continued watching Breaking Bad, but every noise in the house made my ears perk up. At some point, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. Just as I was about to doze off, I heard it again, this time from the closet. A faint click like a button being pressed. My eyes snapped open. The closet door was cracked just slightly, and I swear I saw something move inside. Adrenaline surged through me. I jumped out of bed still in my pajamas and bolted for the front door. I ran outside and straight to my car, cranking the engine to life and speeding out of the driveway. My hands were shaking as I called 911, staring back at the house watching for any sign of movement. The police arrived shortly after and we did a quick sweep of the place. The house was tiny with no real places to hide. It felt like they were just as confused as I was. There were no signs of forced entry, but something didn't sit right. I grabbed my stuff and checked into a nearby hotel, leaving behind the eerie emptiness of that little house. I contacted Marcella through Airbnb explaining what had happened. She was surprisingly unhelpful, offering me only a partial refund, as if it was a simple misunderstanding. It was clear she was dismissive of the whole situation. Still, something about it nagged at me. Had it been her? Was she somehow involved? Or was it someone else, a neighbor, perhaps taking advantage of the remote location to mess with me? I'll never know for sure, but one thing's for certain, I'll never be booking an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere again.